Welcome to Your Health Reset, where we address the real root causes behind health issues today to get you rapid results on your health journey so you can be who you came here to be, mind, body, and spirit. I'm your host, Sinclair Kennally, survivor of complex chronic illness, expert on resolving root causes, and co-founder of Detox Rejuvenation and Meditation RX. Let's get started.
Welcome back. We are continuing our conversation on root causes and rapid results once you finally address those real root causes. I'm your host, Sinclair Kennally, and today I'm joined by the wonderful Ari Witten, also known as the mitochondrial expert or the energy guy. Hi, Ari. Great to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to connect.
Fantastic. One of the things I'm excited to talk to you about today is this area of passion that you have helped bring into our awareness and, in the functional medicine world and beyond. Obviously a lot of the folks that are listening to this event are people who are on their own health journey, who are dealing with chronic illness, dealing with chronic conditions, and do not feel met by the current medical system, and maybe not even by the functional medicine arena, and also we have those practitioners who are looking to pick up new tools and skill sets and are tired of crashing their patients. So I want to speak to both of our wonderful audiences here today.
Well, I have a lot to say on all of those things you just mentioned.
Fantastic. So let's just dive right in. Why is this such an area of passion for you? Like this, why have you chosen to focus specifically on energy and helping, the people today to recover it?
Well, I didn't initially. Health science has been my passion since I was a little kid, but for the first decade or 13 years of that, it was very much the world of athletic performance and bodybuilding, body composition, fat loss, muscle gain. I was an athlete. I was an aspiring bodybuilder. That was my whole world for many years. I did a bachelor's degree in kinesiology, and, that was my jam, that stuff. And I was a personal trainer for many years. I worked with a lot of athletes. And it was actually in my mid-20s that I got sick with Epstein-Barr virus, and I got mononucleosis quite severely for a number of reasons, which I could get into, but basically sleep deprivation combined with kind of a very party lifestyle and living at that time in a single room with two roommates, drinking a lot and sleeping in a moldy room and all these kinds of things, and working a hard job, a hard manual labor job, and basically not recovering at all. And I ended up getting very sick. I lost like 40 pounds in the span of about a month because I couldn't eat any solid foods. I had two, golf balls of, white pus at the back of my throat that made it extremely painful to swallow. So I was living off broth for weeks. But that wasn't really the worst part. The worst part was that for about a year after that, I was left with severe fatigue. And that was really the catalyst for my big shift, because I watched as, being an athlete, being a healthy guy all my life, I watched as all of the sudden, all of my hopes and dreams and my aspirations, and even just the ability to hang out with my girlfriend and my friends and play sports and all the things that I love doing was taken away from me. And I realized really how central energy is to life, to having a good life and to doing what you want to do with your life. And that was, because up to that point, I took energy for granted. There was never any shortage, so I didn't really get it. And then all of a sudden, that put this on my radar. And I became very interested in the topic. And then I went out and sought help during that time that I was severely fatigued. I sought help from conventional doctors, and we could talk specifics of that and some of the science around that. But basically, the very short version is they don't really have anything to offer people with chronic fatigue. And then I also sought out a lot of natural health, alternative medicine, functional medicine health experts who were all pretty much universally obsessed with adrenal fatigue. And, it's all about the adrenals. It's all about cortisol. That's the big thing that regulates energy. And I was very convinced that was true until two things happened. One, I got my adrenals tested and I had normal cortisol levels. And despite having perfectly normal cortisol levels, they still tried to diagnose me with adrenal fatigue. And in addition to that, I started exploring the literature in great depth on that topic. I ended up spending about a full year of my life doing nothing but exploring the literature on that topic. And ultimately discovering, and this is a year of my life condensed into a couple sentences, but ultimately discovering the science doesn't really support the existence of adrenal fatigue, and certainly not the idea that adrenal function or dysfunction and cortisol abnormalities are the main feature underlying chronic fatigue, chronic low energy levels. It's actually not even present in the majority of people who have chronic fatigue. So all of that, my own personal fatigue combined with not being helped, combined with realizing neither people in conventional medicine nor in the natural health circles seem to have a good understanding of what is actually causing fatigue, what regulates human energy levels, how do we optimize our energy levels or get our energy back, combined with the fact that I already had 15 plus years of studying health science, made me go, hey, maybe I should take this obsession and all of my body of knowledge and the fact that I'm already deeply interested in this topic and devote it to me building out, a scientific framework, understanding of what controls human energy levels. So that's what I've been doing for the last decade.
Well, and it's certainly a serious issue today, right?
Mm-hmm.
And certainly even more on topic in the last couple of years, given what has developed recently. And I'd love to, if we have time, to touch on that at the end, because I know you've been paying close attention to the actual science. So
you like to get controversial, huh?
Do I? I just like to make sure that we are all paying attention and taking control of our own health journeys.
I'm with you.
Instead of the TV box.
Yes.
So, yes. With that being said, I would love to just unpack for folks listening. I know that we have a wide range of conditions, people that are attending this event, and yet common among many of them is this energy deficit, right? And this persistent fatigue. So I would love for you to list in your mind what are the real issues today for mitochondrial dysfunction. What do you see as the root causes?
I think maybe I'll start by saying, I think this term mitochondrial dysfunction is getting thrown around a lot. And I think I want to clarify some important distinctions around that. I think will be insightful, and please forgive a bit of explanation here. But I think once I lay some of the groundwork for understanding this topic, I think it will be very helpful when we get to practical solutions or to segue into solutions. So first of all, I think mitochondria have been taught to people in somewhat of an inaccurate way. They're taught to us in our high school and college and medical school biology courses as these sort of mindless energy generators. There are these things, they just take in carbs and fats and they pump out energy. And they're just one of many different organelles in the cell. Like over here's the Golgi apparatus, and here's some lysosomes, and here's the endoplasmic reticulum, and here's the mitochondria, and yada, yada, yada. But the mitochondria really are of central importance in human physiology. And it's largely thanks to the work of Dr. Robert Naviaux, who is a mitochondrial researcher who published a paper called The Cell Danger Response back in 2014, which really revolutionized our understanding of mitochondria, that we now have, I think, a different perspective that is starting to become more known. And that is that mitochondria are not just mindless energy generators. In fact, in Dr. Naviaux's words, they are the central hub of the wheel of metabolism. They're the center of our whole body's metabolism. Metabolism is all of the biochemical reactions in your body. Mitochondria are at the core of that. Your mitochondrial health influences everything. They're not just one of many different things that, they take in carbs and fats, they pump out ATP, yada, yada, yada. It's like, this is really important. And if I can offer an analogy, like with a car, you could look at a car's engine and you could see that it has many different parts. And each of these parts, let's say the spark plugs and the pistons and the engine block and the tubes that come out of the exhaust tubes that come out of the engine, or the catalytic converter, or whatever other parts of the engine, the wheels and tires, right? If you take away any one of these parts, the car won't function. So all of them are necessary for the car to function, but every one of those parts that I just mentioned isn't the thing that is actually regulating whether or not that car's engine is turned on or off and how fast it's driving down the road. That is actually a function of the person sitting in the car turning on the engine and pushing on either the accelerator pedal or the brake. So I think there's a lot of confusion out there as far as people conflating mechanisms or parts that are involved in a process with regulating the process. And it's really important to understand what things are the most upstream that are actually regulating the system, the network. And in this case, I think the evidence really strongly suggests that mitochondria do, and especially that's nowhere is it more true than when it comes to energy in particular. Dr. Robert Naviaux's work has shown that mitochondria really have two roles. They're not just energy generators, they're also cellular defenders. And specifically, they're basically environmental sensors. They're the exquisitely sensitive environmental sensors, like the canaries in the coal mine of our body, that are constantly taking samples of the environment and asking the question, is it safe for us to produce energy? And the way they determine that is based on the degree of danger signals that they're picking up on. And they can sense basically every type of stress or threat or danger signal you can imagine, from poor nutrition to sleep deprivation to psychological stress to respiratory pathogens, infections, to physical injury, physical overtraining, overexertion, to environmental toxicants, and every other type of stressor that you can think up. They can sense signals from all of those things. And to the degree that there is a total body stress load or danger load signaling to those mitochondria that there are threats present, they're turning down the dial on energy production and shifting resources towards cellular defense. Okay, now it is important to understand that process, in my view, should not be called mitochondrial dysfunction. It is actually appropriate, normal, healthy mitochondrial function in the context of a toxic environment, in the context of a dysfunctional lifestyle or environment. And the solution in that context is not just what many practitioners are doing, which is basically throwing a bunch of, CoQ10 and B vitamins and acetyl L-carnitine and alpha lipoic acid at the mitochondria. It's like, oh, you've got mitochondrial dysfunction. Here's a bunch of mitochondrial supplements. No, if energy is being turned down by mitochondria, we need to identify what are these danger signals that have caused mitochondria to respond by decreasing energy output. So that's number one. The second layer is that it is possible to have, for example, nutrient deficiencies or cofactor deficiencies where it is more true mitochondrial dysfunction that might be corrected simply by providing nutrients and supplements in that way. And then there's a third category that's really important and I think not well understood, which is what is the status of mitochondria in your cells? And what I mean by that is, on average, we have between about 500 to 2,000 mitochondria per cell. There's some exceptions to that where we have lots more, or in the case of red blood cells, no mitochondria, but for the most part, 500 to 2,000. Now, it's really important to understand that it's possible to have more like 500 or more like 2,000. So to be more specific, it's been shown that as people age, people lose about 10% of their mitochondrial capacity, their energy producing capacity at the cellular level with each decade of life. Now, maybe that 10% sounds like a small number, but to put it in other words, the average 70-year-old has lost 75% of their mitochondrial capacity. Okay. So this is like going from a Ferrari engine inside your cells when you're young as a 20-year-old to a moped engine when you're 70. Now, there's a physical difference in the size of the engine in your cells. And of course, if you've got a moped engine instead of Ferrari engine, you're going to produce a lot less energy. You don't even have the capacity to produce the amount of energy you did several decades ago. So the good news here is that process that I just described is not a natural product of aging itself. It is actually the product of modern lifestyles, specifically lack of hormetic stress in the lifestyle. And you don't have to lose 75% of your mitochondrial capacity. You can actually maintain youthful mitochondrial capacity, provided that you have your lifestyle dialed in. There's basically, all of that is to say there's three layers of what's going on in the mitochondria. How are they responding to the stress load that's on them? Are they in energy mode or defense mode? Are you maybe missing certain nutrients and cofactors for mitochondrial energy production such that they're sputtering out energy inadequately? And to what extent has your physical engine of your mitochondria shrunk and atrophied down to a very small engine?
So that's a phenomenal groundwork to lay for this next piece then. So given all of that, I'm going to give you a chance to myth bust a little further here to discuss because Naviaux's work has been out for several years, there's some people do grasp parts of that. Why are we still struggling to catch up, especially in the functional medicine world, where I would expect more of us to catch on about how to support people, on their path out of chronic conditions. What is getting lost in the translation there in your mind?
If you want my really blunt, harsh answer, it's that most people aren't paying attention to the scientific literature, and they're just following cookie cutter protocols of whatever somebody else, some other practitioner is doing. And so, there's, I think 90% of what goes on is basically just people following the cookie cutter protocols that someone else built out. And so nobody's actually digging into the scientific, or I shouldn't say nobody, but it's only a small percentage of people are actually digging into the scientific literature, thinking through things, thinking through their understanding of physiology, and trying to come up with novel solutions.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And you can always be blunt on anything that I do because I know what it feels like to be really ill and to be listening to people talk around a topic. It's like, just get to the point. I have very little energy, very little brain capacity. I just need to know the next thing to do.
I mean, I'll give you a personal example. I actually just went to a functional medicine doctor myself out of curiosity to do some microbiome tests and gut tests and a few other tests. And I was just curious if they would have any interesting insights. It was somebody who came very highly recommended by someone who everybody knows and respects, who's a friend of mine. I won't mention names because I don't want to speak poorly about anyone. But this is somebody who, a very highly respected expert who knows everybody, personally recommended to me. So I thought, oh, maybe they're, very high level practitioner and they're going to have some really unique insights for me. And, I was really disappointed to find that this practitioner was basically just, giving me run of the mill sort of recommendations, cookie cutter recommendations based on, what the tests themselves were sort of interpreting. And, I'll mention a specific example, on my microbiome analysis, I don't want to get too detailed here, but basically I did two different tests because I was interested in cross-referencing the accuracy of the tests. I took the same exact stool sample. I did two tests with the same stool sample. I was curious to see what kind of consistency or inconsistencies of findings would emerge between these two tests. There were major inconsistencies between the two tests. One test, for example, said I was very low in Akkermansia muciniphila, which is a bacterial species that's helpful in maintaining mucosal membranes. The other test said I was extremely high in it. One test said I was very low in butyrate production and very high in propionic acid production. These are short-chain fatty acids produced by bacteria in the gut. And the other test showed the exact opposite, extremely high butyrate, very low propionic acid. Again, the same exact stool sample. Okay. And then there were inconsistencies as far as many other things, as far as bacterial species that were either said, one test said it was low, the other one said it was high. And despite all of those things, and despite the fact that all of the indications of SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, were very low, there was no indication of SIBO, the practitioner wanted to prescribe a course of antimicrobials to me. And, he started talking to me about a study that said, there was a study done on rifaximin versus herbal antimicrobials. And I interrupted him. I said, that study that you're referring to, that study was in the context of SIBO, not in the context of the specific abnormalities that one or these other tests is showing in like just a couple species of bacteria, like random species of bacteria. And he said, yeah, but it was very obvious to me because I know that literature that like, hey, this person is basically just applying the same sort of cookie cutter protocol to everyone, pretty much regardless of their findings. Like my findings were not indicative of a need to go do a course of antimicrobials. But anyway, all of this is to say, like, basically, I think a lot of that kind of thing goes on where people are just, they have a protocol for gut and they prescribe the protocol for the gut. And there is a facade of this personalization, and it's all based on your unique, biochemical individuality and your unique microbiome and But the reality is the protocol is, the same in many contexts. And this is not to say that there are not exceptions to that rule of very exceptional practitioners. Of course there are, but I think there's a lot of this kind of thing.
Yeah, I would agree with that. We inherit a lot of people, clients and students from those folks. And I think they really mean, certainly not disparaging their intentions, but the proof is in the results.
Yes.
And the proof is in the tools that you choose. Like if stool tests, some of those companies have 24%, rate of replication or less. Like,
exactly.
can you even call it a rate of replication?
I would say no if it's 24%. I would say to call it rate of replication, it's got to be at least 80%.
Yeah. Let's draw a line in the sand and let's work towards that.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So given all of that, what do you think are the most important factors for people to pay attention to when they are looking at how to help reclaim their own energy? If they're going to be the CEO of their own health, what are those factors?
Circadian rhythm, nutrition, environmental toxicant exposure, gut health, light, deficiencies and toxicities, and hormetic stress. And I'm happy to, obviously that's a list. I'm happy to delve into anywhere you want to go, but that's the simple short version of the answer.
Can we start with circadian rhythm and light toxicity and help people understand the difference between those two?
Elaborate on your question so I know exactly which aspect that
I think
that
a lot of people conflate circadian rhythm with okay, so blue light. I should not do blue light. So can we tease those two topics apart?
Yeah. Okay, perfect. Thank you for the clarification, because there's a lot of light is an area I talk a lot about. There's a lot of angles we could go into here.
Yeah. Just
as a sort of broader context, there are basically 5 bioactive wavelengths of light. So these are parts of the light spectrum that are interacting with human physiology and causing reactions, right? That in itself is kind of a frame switch for most people to wrap their head around, because for the most part, we think of light as light is not interacting with our physiology so much. Light is just like we turn on a light switch to light up a room. Maybe somebody has an awareness of blue light and circadian rhythm and screens and that sort of thing. That's become more known in the last few years. And then maybe people also have an awareness of sunlight and vitamin D, and maybe they don't know what exactly is going on there, but sunlight.
Something about vitamin D and something, I don't know. Yeah.
Something about the sun and vitamin D, but it doesn't matter because I can just take my vitamin D pills and replace that. We have many different parts of this spectrum. Ultraviolet light, and there's UVA and UVB, and they have, to some extent, distinct effects, not only acting on the vitamin D pathway, but also other pathways. In particular, nitric oxide is a big pathway they act on. And there's studies, for example, showing that even in vitamin D knockout mice, where they genetically engineer them to not produce vitamin D from ultraviolet light sun exposure, they still get profound benefits from sun exposure and from ultraviolet light. And it's because a big part of the health benefits of sun exposure are not mediated just through vitamin D, but also through nitric oxide and some of these other mechanisms I'll tell you about. But that is why I just said that you cannot replace sunlight exposure with a vitamin D pill. They're not synonymous. They're not exchangeable. That's one layer. So we have UV light. We also have blue light. And blue light, of course, feeds into our eyes and through nerves that feed into the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is where our circadian clock lies. Okay. So that's one aspect of this circadian clock. And then maybe I'll briefly mention there's a central clock in the brain, and we also have peripheral clocks throughout the whole body. The central clock in the brain is primarily responsive to light inputs, and the peripheral clocks in basically all the tissues of our body, our liver, our skin, our muscles, our intestines, our heart, all these different tissues have their own circadian clocks. They're primarily responsive to food inputs. And ideally, we want to synchronize the two, the central and the peripheral clocks. But just carrying on with light, we also have, so blue light also does more than that. Blue light also has other effects on our physiology. Like for a couple of years ago, it was discovered that blue light through the skin actually helps liberate fatty acids from fat cells. So it causes the release of stored fatty acids in fat cells to be released into the bloodstream. Basically that's just to say that there's a lot of this story of how light interacts with human physiology that, has only been discovered in the last few years and probably will continue to discover more things. For example, there's another big discovery that just happened in the last 6 months or so that it's become more known. And that has to do with the next thing, which is, well, I'll mention infrared first. Infrared is another part of the sun spectrum as well. And infrared, particularly mid and far infrared energy, heats up the body. And that energy primarily gets absorbed into the water in our cells, in our skin, and primarily into the water in our cells. It heats us up, and it does things like alters blood pressure, helps improve blood flow. This also links up very much with like Gerald Pollack's work with easy water and that sort of thing, if people are following that. So there's other aspects of how light interacts with physiology that's something that hasn't really been integrated into physiology textbooks yet. It's still considered controversial, but I think it's plausible. And also enhances sweating and detoxification. And then the last wavelengths are red and near infrared light. And this is what I've actually written a book on. It's called The Ultimate Guide to Red Light Therapy. I wrote it a few years ago, and it's become the most popular and well-known book on the subject. And red and near infrared light now has over 6,000 studies on it showing profound benefits for all kinds of problems. And this is a topic we could talk about just for an hour by itself. But basically, red and near infrared light photons interact with our cells and our mitochondria in a number of different ways. They directly stimulate increased energy production from the mitochondria. They also act as a type of hormetic stress, which actually transiently stresses the cell in the mitochondria, but ultimately confers benefits. And they alter epigenetic signaling, so gene expression from the nucleus. And the oversimplified version of that is it tends to turn off inflammation and turn up growth factors. So tissue-specific growth factors like nerve growth factor, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, IGF-1, insulin-like growth factor in the muscles, collagen production at the level of the skin, and wound healing and things like that. So it's ramping up healing and regeneration and growth and turning down inflammation. All of those you can either be, these are all, again, bioactive wavelengths of light. We can either be deficient or toxic in. And this is really analogous to nutrition. And in the context of nutrition, we have a term when someone isn't getting enough of the nutrients that their body needs, we call it malnutrition. And this is really the same thing. We need these nutrients from light in adequate amounts, these light nutrients. And if we don't have them, we have malillumination. So we're malnourished from these light nutrients. And it is, maybe I won't go so far as saying it's just as important as nutrition, because nutrition is pretty damn important, but it's close to that important. So anyway, all of that's light. And then, as I hopefully pointed out there, circadian rhythm is just one piece of that light story.
That's a really helpful distinction, I think, for people. And it's so important to give this its due, because you could talk about, blue blockers and think you're covering it, but what we're really discussing is how to reclaim your relationship with the natural world so that your body can heal itself as it knows how to do. And that can feel really difficult when, you can't stand up or walk very far.
Yeah.
Like I remember when the first time I walked down a driveway and back, like it was no big deal. I was like, oh my God, like my life just changed. When you're at that level of energy, getting outside several times a day to be a part of the natural rhythm feels like one too many things to do, but until you realize why.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what you said is absolutely true. And I think in a functional medicine world that has become really enamored with biochemical pathways and, individualized testing and technology and supplements and all these things, it's really easy to forget about implementing the basics of like getting out in the sun. Like just before this podcast, I laid out in the sun, listened to a podcast. Getting in the ocean, like going for a hike in nature. It's important to understand, and I think for people not to forget, that over 80% of the chronic disease burden in the United States are diseases of nutrition and lifestyle, and over 80%. And I would argue that pretty much all of those could be eliminated through people simply implementing the universal basics of good nutrition and lifestyle and getting in deeper contact with nature. Not just in the sense of like going out and hiking in the forest, but what does it mean to eat in a natural way? That means eat whole foods that haven't been touched by lots of technology before they got to your plate, right? Eat foods directly from nature. Eat foods that run, fly, swim, or grow out of the ground. right? And if you
You
follow
do not
those,
want Monsanto food.
so if you follow those kinds of simple principles, it's about moving closer to nature, as you said.
Yeah. So in other words, we're squarely in nutrition is one of those factors to pay attention to. And is there anything you want to myth bust about our current diet wars situation or anything when it comes to upregulating our own ability to produce energy?
I tend not to get into these things, but I actually just got into them a little bit with my podcast that came out a few days ago. Speaking personally, I'm not in any particular dietary cult. And I use the term cult very purposefully because this topic has become like, a religious war between different groups who all believe they possess the one truth and the one true knowledge of God, or the one true way humans are designed to eat. And we now, it used to be the case that we could all at least agree that vegetables were healthy. And
I'm sorry, that's not allowed anymore.
exactly. And everything was up for debate, whether it was fat or carbs or grains or meat or saturated fat or dairy or gluten or whatever it was. But everything was debated, but everybody could at least agree that like a salad was helpful. And, if you ate some green, non-starchy, colorful vegetables, some purple cabbage and some broccoli, that was good for you. And now we even have, dietary cults that are trying to make the case that broccoli and beans are the biggest dietary villains that are killing everybody, and it's like, come on, like, does anybody with a brain actually believe that the biggest drivers of why we have so much epidemic of disease in our world today is like people eating too much unprocessed plant foods and vegetables? Like, of course, we know what has caused this disease. It doesn't need to be a mystery. Like, we know, we have the knowledge from decades of study of this topic of what has driven these modern disease epidemics. And guess what? It's not broccoli and lettuce, So it's highly processed foods in particular that are rich in some combination of refined sugars and starches and usually refined fats mixed into them. And then you create things like pizzas and cookies and cakes and crackers and donuts and, all kinds of stuff like that. And, it's very clear when you can look at this pattern all over the world, that when their traditional diets are modernized, are westernized, and they start to integrate those Western processed foods into the diet, guess what? They become obese and diabetic and develop heart disease, and cancer rates skyrocket, like a neurological disease rate skyrocket. This is not a mystery. And it's certainly not broccoli and beans that are causing it.
That's very well said. I totally get it, because we get a lot of people coming to us who are down to the elemental diet, like indefinitely. They're living on powder, or they're down to 3 foods. Like, a guy came to us a few months ago and said, you can't tell me what to eat because I already know what I can tolerate. I'm on the Luke diet. His name was Luke, for his privacy, but he's arrived at the Luke diet, which is 3, maybe 4 ingredients at a time.
Yeah.
And just because we have arrived at that level of dysregulation doesn't mean everything else is inherently bad. It's your job to rebuild so that you can increase resilience and widen that range again.
Exactly. It's like someone who is chronically injuring their leg or has a hurt leg and is like, oh, I found the solution. All I have to do is use these crutches all the time or use this wheelchair all the time. And it's like, no, the goal is to not use a wheelchair and to get you back to normal so you can use your legs again. And, the reason this is analogous is because our microbiomes are very diverse and they have lots of different species that are feeding on lots of different types of fibers and polysaccharides and polyphenols and flavonoids and all kinds of things. And if you don't have those things in your diet, those bacterial species can literally die off and go extinct, and you can never get them back in many cases. Okay. And we all have a unique microbiome that is unique to us and is like a fingerprint. It's passed down from our ancestors, it literally passed down through the generations. And each one of us has bacterial species and a mix of bacteria that is unique. And we don't even have the testing, the microbiome testing to even see this clearly, but we have these species and we have to care for them. We have to take care of our internal ecosystem. And if we are literally starving half those bugs in our gut of the nutrients they need to survive, they die off. And once they die off, you've now stopped the transmission of that microbiome to the next generation in your lineage. And not only that, but when you disrupt your gut microbiome that severely by doing these kinds of extreme diets, and especially low fiber, low plant food diets for very long periods of time, what happens in most of these cases is, even in cases where people think that it's a success for them, as long as I do this diet, I don't have all these symptoms of pain and bloating and gas and all these kinds of things. You've actually created what's called visceral hypersensitivity, where you have actually become hypersensitive to the gas and to the bloating and to the painful stimuli there. Your brain is sensing those sensations as pain when it shouldn't even be sensing them as pain. And so a lot of the symptoms, so it's basically what I'm saying is it's a vicious cycle, because a lot of these people are actually creating a much worse problem of the very symptoms they're trying to avoid by using those kinds of diets. It's the same, it's analogous to what I was saying before. It's like, oh, I've got a hurt leg, so let me not use my leg at all and just use these crutches to get around all the time, and boom, problem solved. Guess what's going to happen to that leg if you don't use it at all anymore? It's all the muscles are going to atrophy. And now you have a much weaker leg, use it or lose it.
Okay, good. So we've now covered light, circadian rhythm, food, and nutrition. And what are the other factors you mentioned that people should pay attention to when reclaiming their energy?
So toys, my house is actually being packed up right now. We're moving Airbnbs tomorrow morning. And I was looking around because there's a tool that I just got that I really love. It's a vibration massager tool that's great. But instead of it being percussive, like most of the massage guns on the market, which are this kind of motion that are poop, 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 like a hammer, it's actually a vibrational tool. And I started seeing a new chiropractor, and he used one on me, and I went, wow, this thing's amazing. I'll have to, maybe at the end of this, I'll see if I can look around for a second and find it. Oh, actually, you know what? I just realized I got it. I realized I took the box out to set my computer on it before this interview. It's called, so I have it right here in front of me. It's rapid release therapy, rapid release. It's more expensive than most of the massagers, but it's really a great tool. So that's one of my favorites. Red light therapy, of course. How could I not have that? I wrote the book on it. And what else do I love? I have a little PEMF device that I got from Dr. Pollack, who you probably know and have interviewed, which helps if you have, like, I've noticed for injuries and pains and things like that. It's a nice tool. I don't know. What else do I have? I really like foam rollers and massage tools and things like that. I do a lot of physical activity, so I need the recovery, and a yoga mat to do yoga. I've gotten more into yin yoga, which is a very gentle, very slow style of yoga. It's too slow for many people, because many people are going into yoga wanting to move and, like, I want to do power yoga. I want to get a workout when I do yoga. For me, yoga is my recovery from doing all the hard physical work that I do. And yin yoga, which is like holding each posture for 3 to 5 minutes, has really been amazing in just helping to restore my body. A few mornings ago, I woke up after a day of, like, I rock climbed, I surfed for 3 hours, and I worked out all in the same day. And then the next morning I was beat up, and I was, like, just stiff and not moving very well. And I did an hour of yin yoga, and I felt like a new man, just that quickly. I'm a huge believer in that. And a yoga mat's cheap and simple, and it's less about the tool doing the work on you and you using it, to do the yoga. So yeah, I would say those. I probably have others, but off the top of my head, that's what comes to mind.
Okay, cool. Thanks. I know that a lot of people listening are searching for that next step. And what have I overlooked? Because they have thrown ubiquinol or whatever form of CoQ10, or, they're trying to prop themselves up enough to have the energy to do the deeper healing work. Do you have any advice for those folks?
Yeah, I would say do it. On the one hand, I'm very much of the sort of mentality that, we all need to address root causes and put the foundation in place before we start working with supplements. But the truth is, I consider there to be an exception to that rule, which is in the context of people with severe fatigue. They don't have the energy and the drive and the physical capacity to do some of these more intensive interventions. Even something like 20 minutes or half an hour of yin yoga might be too much for them, even though it's not so much about doing exercise, but even just doing 20 minutes of anything is hard. And in that context where somebody is so low on energy, the good news is there are certain tools, supplements that have been shown, by themselves to profoundly increase energy levels within a matter of weeks, specifically in people with chronic fatigue syndrome or stress-related exhaustion, clinical burnout, things like that. For example, rhodiola rosea, within a matter of 3 to 4 to cut people's level of fatigue in half. Like, there's another tool, another supplement that I love that most people haven't heard of. It's called NT factor phospholipids. There's a great paper that's been put together by a researcher named Garth Nicholson on the topic called lipid replacement therapy. And this has been studied in the context of numerous different kinds of fatigue: chronic fatigue syndrome, aging-associated chronic fatigue, obesity-related chronic fatigue, more obscure types of fatiguing illness like Gulf War illness. And all of these studies very consistently have shown 25 to 45% increases in energy levels within a matter of 4 to 8 weeks. If you have tools like that available to you, and these are things that I use in my formulas, of course, and many others than the two I just listed. But if you have tools like that available to you that, with very minimal effort, with no real effort, you can get 20, 30, 50% increases in your energy in a month or two. And then you start to have the energy to implement some of the other key needle movers that take more effort to implement in your life. Why not use some little cheat codes here and there?
Yeah, especially as a little bit of a life jacket in the meantime.
Yeah.
So your feet underneath you. Yeah, I really appreciate all of your insight today. I think we did a great job of giving some high level insight and some, across the full landscape of issues, and perhaps maybe why we're still catching up to the data. A little more intellectual rigor and curiosity is needed, I think, at this time. So
absolutely. Thanks so much, Sinclair. And if I can add a compliment from somebody who's done several hundred interviews, you did a great job leading the discussion and asking great questions.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Every one of these is a love letter to the people listening, because I remember what it's like to be them.
Thanks for listening. Go to detoxrejuvenation.com to find the links in the show notes to everything we covered in this episode. Please subscribe, review, and share with other humans who need this precious information. Let's help each other. Until next time, love, Sinclair.